Hello, this is Taha.
This is Anaina,
This is Movie Masala.
and we're here to yap at you about films we watched recently.
And today we're doing
Palestine 36, directed and written by Anna Marie Jassir.
Thomas Hopkins, Private Secretary to the High Commissioner.
Yusuf Bisawi.
Is it the right of the English to distribute the land as they like?
Land registration will protect you.
بيجهزوا الأرض لكومبانية جديدة جنب الأراضي بالضبط.
We are asking for your help in protecting our villages.
I ask you all to have faith. We can create a united and peaceful Holy Land.
So this is like the addition to our collection of films on Palestine, and this is the latest one. It just released in the UK on the 31st of October and is still in a lot of cinemas. And unlike a lot of the other Palestinian films we've done, which have been documentaries, this is a semi-historical fiction film. And just like as a side note, as someone who's like really interested in the trends of what kind of cinema come out of what regions, I've noticed that Palestine does a lot of documentaries. And this is kind of obviously not the only and first one, but first fictional film I've watched, like historical drama film I've watched. And it's really, really interesting because, and I'll get into this more later, it also uses archival documentary footage. So like, I just want to start by saying like documentary is so ingrained in Palestine because obviously of the kind of suffering and oppression that is constantly denied, which is kind of what this film is about.
also like I think on that topic, there are other films that come out of Palestine which don't focus on just like colonialism, genocide, imperialism, all of that. But it's also very understandable that when you live in a country that is under constant apartheid and like war and like oppression, it's hard to have a film industry that is able to really strive for anything major.
Exactly.
Right? You can see why you don't get that much output, very understandably so.
100%. And I think one of the reasons potentially for that kind of like film output is because of the fact that their oppression has been denied and continues to be denied. Like it doesn't exist, right? Because it goes against the myth making of the nation of Israel.
Yes.
So, and that's like a really integral part of this film as well. Not the myth of Israel, but rather the creation of this kind of denial and refusal of the Palestinians, not only their land and their people, but also their suffering and pain through kind of like various colonial tactics. To like kind of get into it, this film is set in 1936, where the Arab Revolt was prefaces it, and then during the Arab Revolt of 1936 and 1937. So this is before, for like historical context, before it was kind of bartered off or like sold off or kind of
Pre-World War II, basically.
Exactly, pre-World War II, but also like quote unquote the independence of Palestine, which it never really happened because it became the state of Israel. And it's at this moment where the Jewish refugees from Europe are coming into Palestine as a kind of move against as had happened. And it's this really crucial moment because the Balfour Declaration, which essentially gave off Palestine to the Zionists and Jewish refugees as they rightfully were, is what is the major thing at this point. It is the major moment.
It's the status quo which the film is presenting its narrative.
Exactly. And this film is grounded in very real historical kind of events. But the characters, a lot of the characters, other than kind of the British colonial like figures or whatever, are fictional. But they might as well have been real. Basically, we have two depictions of Palestinian people at this moment. We have the workers from the farmers and the rural people who live outside of urban Jerusalem, which is the main kind of city in focus in this film. And they're the ones who actually work and tend to the land and live in the villages, which are being actively destroyed in replacement of settlements. And then we have the urban elite who live in Jerusalem. They're not experiencing the kind of physical violence and brutality of it, but they are obviously subject to colonial rule and kind of the discriminatory apartheid system that will begin to take place. But very much so, these two groups are like put apart, made to stand separately. And the bridge between them is this character called Yusuf, played by Kareem Daoud Anaya.
So is it in the sense of like they're made to be separate by, again, like British divide and rule? Or is it like just because of how in every place in the world class separates people in general?
It's a bit of both. The first bit of what you said, the kind of divide and conquer thing, comes up later on in the film, and I'm guessing in like real as well. But I think the premise is that class and capitalism separate a people.
Okay.
Right, and then there's this bridge of this character of Yusuf, who's from the primary village and kind of works in this elite Palestinian man's house in Jerusalem as well. And then we kind of see I don't want to say the conflict, but basically the conflict of the film proceed through this kind of character's lens, but also the people around this character. And you have basically, the plot it's not simple, but it functions as a very distinct historical fiction where we see kind of instances of, for example, British colonial violence towards the villagers when they kind of threaten them about their weapons, etc. And then in the city, we see the man that Yusuf's working for's wife kind of running a newspaper and working as but under an alias. And so you kind of see these elements of history cross into the plot. What I kind of want to focus on is not really the plot, although it really kind of is, but I want to talk about the creation of this film rather.
Okay.
Because I think, or what this film means in terms of what making a film like this means is through its kind of plot. And I don't think this is anything to do with spoilers, because fact, even though the characters are fictional, it is based off of factual accounts of what happened in villages that rebelled and revolted.
I mean, you'd need to know very little world history to be able to know what really happened.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think what I want to focus on is what it means to give that kind of history today in today's landscape. I think to systemically show what British colonialism looked like in a fictional format. Obviously, there are archives and archives and archives that show what it looks like. But most of them, unfortunately, because of the way we view history, especially in the West, are from the British perspective.
Yeah, because that's the only thing that survived. Again, the age-old saying of history is written by the victors.
Exactly. I think what's so distinct about this film is that it uses some of that archival footage and kind of intersplaces it with the screened depictions of the film. And the archives are not meant to tell part of the story, but they're meant to add to the environment of Palestine. We are meant to see what Palestine looks like and not what was happening in Palestine. The narrative of the film will tell us what happens in Palestine, but the archival footage is what Palestine looked like. So the claim on what Palestine looks like, coming from a Palestinian filmmaker, coming from a Palestinian film, is really, really important because it goes against that kind of denial and refusal that I was talking about earlier. It very clearly tells you, yes, Palestine was there. Yes, its people were there. They were being asked to accommodate these refugees into their lives. This is kind of a major theme in the film as well, that basically how the Jewish refugees were being presented to the Palestinian people was as people that they would live alongside, that they would live with. Whereas when they actually came, they started building settlements and kind of taking over the land rather than living in the land.
Basically, they were refugees when they came in, but the film showcases how British colonialism used that as a means or a method to colonize the country itself. Because, again, they didn't live with the land, they lived on the land and took from it without giving back.
Exactly. And I think because of these reasons, above everything else, this film is a scathing critique of British colonialism in Palestine and in general a lot of places around the world as well, because it ends up implying that the Jewish people who were brought there, they were only brought there as this is your promised land because the British told them this is your promised land, right? So kind of it repeatedly kind of implicates British empire and British rule as the kind of butchers or salespeople, unearned salespeople of Palestine. And you see in like little moments, you see them kind of being like, yeah, but who owns the land? Like you need to register your land so that, you know, the ownership of the land is kind of determined. They won't be able to come and take it from you. And like in the Palestinian people that they're talking to, this is like a British secretary of the commissioner or whatever, telling them to register the land. At the Palestinian chief's like, yeah, just like a blank look on his face. And that blank look on his face, you can like fill in by saying, yeah, but why is this land yours to give away? And also these are your rules and your systems you're putting on our land. We've never lived like this.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting avenue to explore, because I think when you think of like indigenous people in any place, right, in that senses as well, who live on land and have been living on land for so long, they've never really made property deeds, right? Again, for example, the British went to America and colonized America, right? The Native Americans didn't have property deeds that they could have, because again, this goes into a whole system of like how the state kind of exists to just protect property to a certain extent.
Exactly.
Right?
And it like brings up the fact that a land is only someone else's to take because the people who already live on it don't abide by your rules of ownership of taking and giving and lending or whatever. Right. So I think that was a really, really like interesting take on it. And it doesn't set up, it doesn't tee up, but it very deeply historicizes our current kind of political climate and the current genocide that's going on in Gaza and the kind of apartheid system that the rest of Palestine lives under. It explains it so well in like 120 minutes, which I think is like a great thing to do.
Any film about the past is always somewhat to do with the present.
Exactly. Getting to like elements of the film though, which I'll kind of quickly do over. I wouldn't say that this is like the most stylistic film, but I don't necessarily see that as an issue. The only part that I had somewhat of a gripe with was in the first half, the kind of editing and pacing of it, where a lot of like shots were, I felt, cut off too soon. Like maybe we should have hung on like maybe a minute extra to a lot of shots. And then the kind of way that they were pieced together felt really broken. And I'm sure there is like, you can derive some kind of meaning out of it, but I definitely think that to kind of land a few, not just necessarily emotional, but also like plot-based punches. Certain shots, certain scenes definitely needed to be longer. But that was fixed in the second half.
And also, like, again, you can very much agree with the message and everything else that the film doing, but also be like, hey, there were points where it just didn't deliver or just kind of failed or like left a bit.
Yeah.
Which is perfect. Like, which doesn't necessarily say that the film is bad or the message has any issue. It just says, as a film, very specifically, there's things missing that I think would have made it better.
Exactly, for sure. And another thing which I think few people kind of brought up as well was that the archival footage I was talking about, in certain instances, it looks almost AI made.
That could be also like upscaling. Like sometimes when you upscale things, they become very janky if you upscale them too much. You has that AI soft look thing that's so used.
Exactly. And I'm going to give the film the benefit of the doubt because I did read this in the post-credits that there was a line that said all archival footage has not been manipulated, it has just been touched up. That's not the exact thing that was said, but that's kind of the gist of what it was saying.
Because a lot of this is like grainy and even like broken down.
Exactly. So they kind of just smooth over the grains because like I said, it's meant to depict what Palestine looks like. It's not meant to think, oh, I'm in the present going back to the past. You're meant to think that you are in the past. So you can't use archival footage as archival footage and then have like clean, smooth, current day digital footage.
Yeah. It's like a dissonance that it creates.
Exactly. There is somewhat of a dissonance, especially if you're looking like with a really keen eye. But other than that, I think this is like a really, really great film. It has a bunch of kind of co-producers, but primarily they remain from the kind of Middle East. It's been funded by Qatar and kind of the BFI as well, and Curzon Cinemas as well, and Watermelon Pictures. Basically, it's like, despite it being kind of
indie, small,
mainly circulated in the UK film, it is very much rooted in Palestine. A lot of it was shot in Palestine and Jordan.
I also see it has Jeremy Irons in it, which is kind of fascinating.
It does. I haven't talked about the cast a lot because, like I said, the characters feel kind of secondary to the message of the film.
Fair.
But yes, Jeremy Irons plays High Commissioner Arthur Baucho, how you pronounce his name, basically one of the architects of giving up of Palestine. It also has Hiam Abbas as Hanan, one of the elderly village women, and Hiam Abbas is she's becoming this phenomenon, and I love her. I've seen her in quite a lot of things, and she's just like, as usual, fantastic. Which brings me to the point that there is so much focus on female resistance and the resistance of women and the role they played in these revolts, which I think is on the director, Anna Marie Jasir, who is also a Palestinian woman. It honors them, I feel, really, really well. And it doesn't take this male-centric, male-heavy view, which I feel is so important as well. And kind of ingrains that in the past of Palestine, which is what it would have been like. So I think, as a historical fiction film, it's really great because it balances the historical and the fictional elements really well. And I just have a few nitpicky issues with it, which I think doesn't even matter.
Fair enough. So those were our thoughts. Thank you for tuning in. This podcast is produced solely by us with musical assets from Pixabay. If you enjoyed this, please do share it. See you again next time.